The cold steel of the handcuffs bit into Jasmine's wrists as her own officers shoved her into the patrol car. No questions, no ID check, just force. The uniform she'd earned meant nothing to them yet. Outside, cameras gathered. Inside, the station buzzed with cruel laughter. They thought they'd won. They didn't know she was the police chief. By sunrise, their arrogance would unravel. Their careers would burn. Jasmine's arms were wrenched behind her back, her body pressed against the hood of her SUV. The sun burned into her skin, but the heat was nothing compared to the humiliation boiling inside her. "What's the charge?" she demanded, her voice steady despite the storm inside. Officer Markson didn't answer. Instead, his grip on her wrist tightened, his fingers digging into her skin. "Quiet," Officer Davis snapped. "We'll deal with you at the station." Jasmine clenched her jaw, forcing herself to stay calm. This wasn't the first time she'd seen a power trip, but this time, she was the target. A small crowd had gathered, whispering, watching. No one stepped in. She knew she had done nothing wrong. She had followed every law, signaled every turn. But it didn't matter. To them, she was just another black woman in a nice car. Her instinct screamed to fight back, to pull away. But she knew better. Resist, and they'd make it worse. Instead, she burned their faces into her memory. Their arrogance, their cruelty. They thought they had won. They had no idea who they were dealing with. The police car roared through the streets, sirens blaring. Jasmine sat stiffly in the back, wrists aching from the too tight cuffs. Every bump in the road sent a fresh jolt of pain through her hands, but she refused to wince. Up front, Markson chuckled. "Another one who thinks they're untouchable," Davis smirked. "Driving a car like that?" "You knew this was coming," Jasmine inhaled sharply. They weren't just arresting her, they were enjoying it. She leaned forward as much as the cuffs allowed. "Do you even know who I am?" Markson glanced at her in the mirror, amusement flickering in his eyes. "Oh, we know exactly what you are." Her jaw clenched. Not who, what. She'd heard it before. The subtle ways power was used to diminish. Strip away identity, reduce someone to a category. She wanted to scream, but she forced herself to stay calm. They didn't know, not yet. The station loomed ahead, a concrete cage waiting to swallow her whole. Jasmine exhaled slowly. This wasn't over, not even close. The police car screeched to a stop in front of the station. Before Jasmine could even adjust, the door was yanked open. "Out," Markson ordered, grabbing her arm roughly. Jasmine stumbled as she was pulled from the car. No care, no respect, just force. The moment she stepped inside, the whispers started. Officers loitering near the entrance paused mid-conversation, exchanging glances. Some smirked, others raised their eyebrows in surprise. Markson paraded her forward, his grip still firm. "Well, well," he mused. "Looks like the fancy car didn't buy you a free pass." A few chuckles echoed through the room. Jasmine's skin burned, not from embarrassment, but from rage. They were enjoying this. Thrown into a cold metal chair, she glared at the two officers. They still had no idea. Davis leaned down, sneering. "Not so special now, huh?" Jasmine said nothing. She let them dig their own graves. They thought they had power. They had no idea how quickly it was about to be ripped away. Laughter echoed through the station. The walls seemed to magnify every cruel word, every smug chuckle. "Thought she was above the law," Davis muttered, shaking his head. Markson leaned against the desk, arms crossed. "Bet she's regretting that attitude now." Jasmine sat motionless in the chair, her hands still cuffed behind her back. The metal dug into her wrists, but she didn't move. She wouldn't give them the satisfaction. The station air was thick with arrogance. Officers walked past without a second glance as if this was normal, and maybe for them it was. "Wonder what she was up to," one officer whispered near the front desk. Markson chuckled. "Who cares? Fancy car like that? Probably dirty money." Another laugh. "Figures." Jasmine's jaw clenched. The assumptions, the casual way they reduced her to a stereotype. She stared at the clock. How long had she been sitting here? It felt like an eternity. A younger officer walked by, pausing. He looked at her, then at Markson. "You got her booked already?" he asked. Markson smirked. "Nah, letting her cool off first." The younger officer shifted uncomfortably. Jasmine caught it, the slight unease. Good. Someone knew this wasn't right, but no one spoke up. No one dared. Markson turned back to her, leaning in close. "You look like you got something to say, lady." Jasmine met his gaze head on. Let them laugh. Let them mock. Because when the truth hit them, it would be a reckoning they'd never forget. Jasmine exhaled slowly, steadying herself. She had faced worse. She had survived worse. But something about this moment cut deeper than anything before. She had spent her career fighting for justice, for fairness. She believed in the system. And yet, here she was. on the other side of it. Her mind replayed every person she had ever arrested, every protest she had ever seen, every time someone had cried, "I didn't do anything." Had they felt this same helplessness? Had they known, deep down, that it didn't matter what they said, no one would listen? She had always told herself she was different, that she was one of the good ones. But now she wasn't Chief Jasmine Williams. She was just another black woman in cuffs. She pressed her hands against the cold metal of the chair, grounding herself. No, this wasn't how her story ended. She lifted her chin, her gaze burning into the officers laughing across the room. They thought they had control. They thought this was their moment. They had no idea who they had just humiliated. Her time in this cell would end. And when it did, their careers wouldn't survive what came next. She straightened her shoulders. The storm was coming, and she would be the one bringing it. The door slammed open. Silence fell over the station. The mocking laughter died instantly. Detective Harper stormed in, his sharp eyes scanning the room. He was not happy. "What the hell is going on here?" His voice cut through the tension like a knife. Markson straightened up, caught off guard. "Just handling a case, Detective." Harper's gaze shifted to the woman sitting in the chair. His eyes widened, shock, disbelief, then fury. "Jasmine?" His voice barely contained his rage. Markson frowned. "Wait, you know her?" Harper's jaw clenched. "Know her?" He took a slow step forward. "She's the police chief." The words hit like a bomb. Markson and Davis froze. The arrogance drained from their faces, replaced by pure, unfiltered panic. Jasmine didn't move, didn't speak. She let them drown in their own mistake. Harper turned his glare to the two officers. "You arrested the chief of police. You humiliated her. You threw her in a damn cell without cause." Markson stammered, his face pale. We didn't know." Harper didn't blink. "Then you should have done your damn job." The weight of their mistake was crushing them now. There was no way out. Jasmine's lips curled into the smallest smirk. Now they knew, and this was only the beginning of their downfall. Markson's hands clenched at his sides. The cocky officer was gone now. He was scrambling. "Look, Detective," he started, his voice suddenly careful. She resisted. "We had to detain her." Harper's eyes burned with fury. "Resisted what? Being pulled from her car for no reason?" Davis stepped forward, desperation creeping into his voice. "She refused a search." Harper's laugh was sharp, bitter. "A search? Did you have probable cause?" Silence. Jasmine leaned back in her chair, watching them squirm. "You didn't even ask for her ID, did you?" Harper pressed, taking a slow step toward them. Markson swallowed hard. We assumed." "Assumed," Harper repeated, his voice like ice. "You assumed a black woman in a nice car must be a criminal." Davis looked at Jasmine now, his face tight with fear. It wasn't like that." Jasmine tilted her head. "Wasn't it?" "Let me guess," she said, her voice calm but deadly. "You saw my car, saw me, and thought must be stolen." Davis flinched. Harper folded his arms. "You arrested your own boss without even realizing it." Markson's breath was shaky now. His face, once so smug, was pale as a ghost. Jasmine leaned forward, her eyes locked on them. "Tell me," she said, her voice like steel. "How do you think this ends for you?" Their silence was answer enough. Fear in their eyes, priceless. The weight of their mistake hit them like a freight train. Markson's mouth opened, but no words came out. Davis took a shaky step back. Their arrogance was gone, replaced by sheer terror. Harper's eyes didn't leave them. "You didn't just arrest the police chief," he said, voice dangerously low. "You humiliated her. You dragged her through this station. You laughed at her." Markson's throat bobbed. His confidence had collapsed. Jasmine stood slowly, her movements deliberate. "And now you know who I am." Davis lifted a hand, as if that could stop what was coming. "Chief, we didn't mean." Jasmine's expression didn't change. "Didn't mean what?" Her voice was calm, but it cut like a knife. "Didn't mean to profile me? Didn't mean to enjoy it?" The air in the room grew suffocating. Harper took another step toward them. "You two just ended your own careers." Markson shook his head. We can fix this." His voice was pleading now. "We didn't know." Jasmine tilted her head slightly. "And that's supposed to make it better?" Davis's face was slick with sweat. They knew. They were finished. And nothing they said could stop what was coming. Markson tried to step forward, desperation in his eyes. "Please, Chief." Jasmine's gaze turned cold. "You made your choice." The silence in the room was deafening. Their downfall had begun. Markson's hands trembled as he stepped forward, his voice cracking. "Chief, please, we didn't realize it was you." Jasmine didn't blink. "And if I weren't the chief, what then?" Davis's lips parted, but no words came. Harper crossed his arms. "I'll tell you what, you would have locked her up without a second thought, maybe kept her in that cell all night, maybe longer." Markson's breathing was ragged now. It was a misunderstanding. We were just following procedure. Jasmine took a slow step forward. Was it procedure to throw me into a cell? To mock me? To assume I was a criminal before you even asked my name? Davis's knees nearly buckled. We were just doing our jobs. Jasmine let out a cold laugh. Your job was to uphold the law. Your job was to serve and protect. But instead, you played judge, jury, and executioner. Markson's face was ghostly pale. Please, Chief. We'll do anything. Just don't report us. Harper's voice was like steel. Oh, you're getting reported. Davis shook his head frantically. No, Chief, please. We can fix this. Jasmine studied them for a long moment, letting them drown in their fear. Then, finally, she spoke. You made your choice when you put those cuffs on me. Now, you live with it. The pleading grew louder, but it didn't matter because their fate was already sealed. Harper didn't waste a second. He pulled out his phone and dialed. This is Detective Harper. We have a serious misconduct case. 2 officers arrested the chief of police without cause. I want internal affairs here immediately. Markson's face drained of color. Wait, no, Detective, please. Davis looked desperate now. We can fix this. We'll apologize. Jasmine cut him off. Fix this? She took a slow step forward, her gaze unwavering. The only thing that gets fixed today is the corruption you thought you could get away with. The station, once filled with laughter and arrogance, had turned into a graveyard of silence. Every officer had heard. Every single one knew exactly what was happening. Footsteps echoed through the hall. The captain himself stepped in, his eyes scanning the room, landing on Jasmine. Chief Williams, I just received a call. He stopped, looking between Markson and Davis, then at Jasmine's wrists, still red from the cuffs. His expression darkened. What the hell happened? Harper folded his arms. They arrested the chief. No probable cause, no identification check, just an assumption. Markson looked like he wanted to disappear. Davis's mouth opened, then closed. No excuse would save them now. The captain turned to Jasmine. Chief, I assure you, Jasmine's voice was cold. I want them investigated. I want their records pulled, and I want every officer in this department to know this ends today. The room stood still. The storm had officially arrived. The investigation moved fast. Internal affairs didn't hesitate. The evidence was overwhelming. Within hours, the department was buzzing. Everyone knew. The whispers had turned into full conversations, and the weight of the scandal loomed over the station like a dark cloud. Markson and Davis were called into the captain's office. They didn't come out the same. Jasmine stood tall as she watched them step into the hallway, their shoulders slumped, their faces pale. They already knew what was coming. The captain's voice cut through the silence. Effective immediately, Officers Markson and Davis are relieved of duty. Murmurs spread like wildfire. No one had expected this. Markson turned to Jasmine, desperation flickering in his eyes. Chief, please. She didn't flinch. You earned this. A second later, internal affairs officers stepped forward. Their badges were stripped from their chests, their guns taken from their holsters. Davis's hands trembled. He looked around at his fellow officers, but no one came to his defense. The reality hit them both at the same time. Their careers were over. No cover-ups, no quiet resignations, no second chances. They weren't being escorted out the back door. They were being walked out the front, in front of every officer. In front of every camera that had gathered outside the station. Their downfall wasn't private, it was public. Jasmine exhaled slowly. Justice had been served, but she wasn't done yet. Because this wasn't just about her. This was about fixing the system that let it happen in the first place. The cameras flashed. The crowd outside the station had doubled, reporters pushing forward, microphones stretched out. Jasmine stood at the podium, her hands resting firmly on the sides. This wasn't just about 2 fired officers. This was bigger. She took a deep breath. Now was the time to make it clear this would never happen again. This isn't just about me, she said, her voice steady, strong. This is about every person who has ever been treated like a criminal because of the color of their skin. Every person who has been silenced, ignored, or humiliated by the very system meant to protect them. The crowd listened, completely still. I have spent my career believing in law enforcement, fighting to make it better, but today I was forced to face the truth. She let the words hang in the air. The system isn't broken. It was built this way. Murmurs rippled through the audience. She wasn't sugarcoating it. 2 officers lost their jobs today. But this isn't just cops. This is about accountability. And I promise you this, change starts now. A reporter raised his voice. Chief Williams, what happens next? Jasmine's jaw tightened. We rebuild, we train, and we don't stop until every officer understands that the badge is not a weapon, it's a responsibility. a final flash of cameras. This wasn't just a press conference. It was a declaration of war against injustice. And Jasmine Williams was leading the fight. The aftermath of the scandal shook the entire department. For the first time in Ardenville's history, real change was happening. And it wasn't just words, it was action. Mandatory anti-racism training was enforced, not optional, not a suggestion, a requirement. New policies were drafted. Officers were no longer allowed to stop or search a vehicle without documented probable cause. Every officer was now held accountable for their actions. Jasmine made it clear, if they wanted to wear the badge, they had to earn it. The first day of training was tense. Officers shuffled into the conference room, eyes shifting, some uncomfortable, others resentful. Jasmine stood at the front. She looked every single one of them in the eye. "If you think this training is a waste of time," she said, "you don't belong in this department." Silence. "You want to be a cop? Be a good one." A few officers exchanged glances. Some nodded. Others looked away. She knew change wouldn't happen but this was a start. And for the first time in a long time, she felt something she hadn't in years, hope. Because today, the system didn't win. She did, and she wasn't done yet. While the Ardenville Police Department moved forward, Markson and Davis fell into obscurity. The news spread fast. Their names were blasted across headlines, their faces plastered on television screens. Fired for racial profiling, fired for misconduct, fired for abusing their power. No department would touch them. They weren't just unemployed, they were unemployable. Markson tried to fight it. He called in favors, reached out to old friends. No one answered. Davis? He disappeared, vanished from social media, cut off from the world. But the damage was already done. Their families distanced themselves. Their friends stopped returning calls. Markson walked into a coffee shop one morning, hoping to escape the whispers. But the whispers followed him. That's him, the one who got fired. Serves him right. He gritted his teeth, grabbed his coffee, and rushed out. But he couldn't outrun his own reputation. Everywhere he went, people knew. Davis was no better. Once respected, now a disgrace. And the worst part? They did it to themselves. Jasmine didn't have to lift a finger. Justice had already taken care of them. Because some mistakes don't fade with time. Some mistakes follow you forever. And this was their legacy now. Jasmine didn't stop at Ardenville. This was bigger than her, bigger than one city. She took the fight to a national level. She wasn't just a police chief anymore. She was a leader in the movement for change. She spoke at conferences, sat on panels, met with lawmakers. This isn't just about bad officers, she told them. It's about a system that allows them to exist in the first place. Her words carried weight. Departments across the country began reviewing their policies. Some launched new racial bias training. Others revised their traffic stop procedures. And then, the big step, a federal initiative was introduced. A nationwide push for transparency in policing. Jasmine's name was attached to it. Some supported her. Others fought against it. But none could ignore her. Reporters asked if she feared backlash, if she worried about retaliation. She only smiled. "I spent years fighting for a seat at the table. I'm not leaving now." Her voice reached thousands, then millions. She wasn't just advocating for herself. She was speaking for every person who had ever been silenced. And this time, no one could shut her down. Months passed, then a year, but Jasmine's fight never stopped. The Ardenville Police Department wasn't the same. New leadership emerged. A stronger, more accountable system was in place. Officers were trained differently, taught to see people, not just suspects. But Jasmine's impact stretched far beyond her city. Her initiative had grown into a movement. Other police departments followed suit. Policy changes, accountability measures. The ripple effect was undeniable. Jasmine had become a symbol of justice. She received awards, invitations to speak across the country. But she never let it distract her from the mission. One evening, she stood outside the precinct, staring up at the building. A young black girl approached her, hesitation in her eyes. "Are you Chief Williams?" the girl asked softly. Jasmine smiled. "I am." The girl's grip tightened on her mother's hand. "I want to be like you when I grow up." Jasmine knelt down, meeting her eyes. "You can, and you'll be even better." The girl beamed. Jasmine stood tall. She had fought the battle. She had won the war. But most importantly, she had opened the door for those who would come next, because her legacy wasn't just about what she changed. It was about who she inspired. And that would last forever.